creativity, and progress.
And so what happens oftentimes in shows like Lost or other crazy banana shows that don't quite know where they're going or what they're doing is they will set something up, something that will get your curiosity going really, really hard, something that you can't help but want to get invested in and want to come back over and over and over again to see how it resolves itself. And when they don't pay it off at all, or they pay it off in a way that is unsatisfactory to the fans, that's when you have a problem on your hands. That's when the finale doesn't succeed, and that's when people get kind of irate or whatnot. I'm trying to think of a great example. You mentioned obviously Lost has some of those in there, but there's other examples too.
Well, another show that tended to do this from time to time, and it actually got canceled because of it, was that show Carnivale that I
that you love.
Yeah, I love that show. I absolutely love that show. But the problem is, and I recognize its faults. It was very. I think it would have thrived in today's culture because in the Netflix thing where everything drops at once.
Yes.
The problem was that it was released back in like 03, 04, where and back when it was still a weekly thing, and it had a very, very slow
burn.
Yeah, it was a very slow burn, and but it had a fascinating storyline and mythos. And I really enjoyed that, and it really drew me in because I'm not a big fan of carnivals and circuses and all that. Like, in fact, I didn't think I would like the show at all, but they did hit some beats that I really enjoyed. So it just pulled me right in, and it got canceled at the end of its second season.
Yes.
And it was unfortunate because they had set up all these clues. Yes. And you were like, oh, this is going to be great. And then they found out that they were going to be canceled, so they had to try to tie up as many as they could.
Not fair. Yeah.
So what ended up happening, the way I explain it to people, is that the series finale, essentially, of the end of season 2, was they did answer a ton of questions in the last 15 minutes. Like they tied it up, and like it was great. It was like, oh wow, they've tied up a ton of stuff. This is fantastic, cool. And then in the last 5 minutes, they opened up like 7 threads.
Oh, of course.
And it was like, oh my god, they just completely took those away.
Right. It's almost like a little bit of a FU to HBO as far as like, hey, in case you're curious, producer HBO, what happens? You'll never know because we're taking our ball and going home.
Yeah. And it's unfortunate because it's gone away.
Yes.
And we're never going to know how it ends.
No, but I don't blame you for that. I don't blame you for that at all. Another thing that you made me think of too was with shows like Carnivale. Obviously, it was meant to be. They intended on it being several episodes, several seasons to set things up, to build things up, and let things play out as intended. And sometimes it happens where shows get canceled so early in their runs that before they expected for it to get canceled, they know what to do. Like Firefly as one that's as well known. Now that was a show that was more episodic. However, there were individual storylines as far as the characters themselves, the things their own personal journeys that they're going through, that people wanted to see kind of play out more or see how they would develop. One of them was between Malcolm, and Anara, the woman, the beautiful woman. People were wondering would they ever become something. People were wondering what happened with Wash and Zoe, or all these kind of things that would happen. And the movie that came out, Serenity, did kind of answer some of these questions. It did deal with some of these things. But at the same time, people, just about every person that enjoyed that show felt like, of course, because it was canceled after only 12 episodes, so many things were just left unresolved. Yeah. And that wasn't really on the fault of the producers or showrunners, but it's one of those things where it was a finale left, unsatisfactorily.
Yeah, and then and that's a shame when that happens, and unfortunately, in cases like Firefly and Carnivale, I think as well, they were just kind of ahead of their time.
Yes.
If they had been created and released just 2, 3, 4 years later, I think they would have succeeded because they would have been in a different. Because Firefly, I think the biggest thing it suffered from the same thing that Freaks and Geeks suffered from, which is it hit before geek culture did.
Right before.
Yeah, it was right before. In fact, a part of it, like it was the
kind of catalyst. Yeah.
Yeah, it was the catalyst. Yeah, it was the catalyst of geek culture. Part of the catalyst. and because it was in that time, it just kind of died in the birth of geek culture, which is a shame.
But it's a shame, but also it's one of those things where now, because of geek culture, we can kind of look back on those shows like Freaks and Geeks and Firefly with reverence, and they actually celebrate them, almost like they were martyrs that kind of, they died to pave the way for, other shows and other movies and series and things that come out. You mentioned also with Netflix, how Netflix has a thing where they have with binge culture now, they can release 10 episodes, release a full season of a show. So that way, in some capacity, you can get some kind of a resolution within at least that season. Even if it gets canceled, it doesn't have to come out for a second season, it's fine. The showrunners pretty much took care of it so that the first season, one season would tell one story, more or less. There may be a cliffhanger, but at least you'd be satisfied on some level. And that's something that they didn't do before with other shows. It wasn't because they weren't intending for them to be, they weren't meant to be a binge culture. And now they are. So it's a different thing.
And it's interesting that you bring that up, because like in situations where you have like Netflix, where it's complete, everything's being dropped at once, that means the entire season, I know this seems like an obvious thing to mention, but the entire season was produced.
Right.
So like in the situation like we mentioned Lost before, like I remember reading how the producers and the showrunner and the writers for that show, they were writing like episodes, like 3 episodes ahead of what they were recording. So it literally
they did not know.
They didn't know what the hell they were doing and where they were taking it. Where when you take a show like the new show on Netflix that just dropped recently called Dead to Me, which I'm hearing fantastic things
with Kristen
about.
Applegate and
Linda
Cardellini. Linda Italian name.
Linda Italian name, who interestingly was in Freaks and Geeks as well.
She was, you're right. And she was Hawkeye's wife.
I remember the end. She was Velma in Scooby-Doo.
But now we're getting deep.
And she is the reason why I really like Velma now.
It is.
But
Put your pants back on, please.
You know the rules.
I apologize.
What the hell was I talking about?
So I think you're talking about the binge culture.
The binge culture. Like Dead to Me, the entire season had to be written, produced, and put out there so they had to know what the finale of the season was. See how I tied it back to finale? So they had to know what the finale of the season was before they even did it. Where with The Lost, they didn't even know how the season would end when they started recording it.
They had no clue.
And so
even within the episodes, because I'm sure you know too about Lost, how that originally the way they intended for that pilot episode to go was that spoiler alert for an episode that they made. What am I doing? Anyways, non-spoiler alert, jerks. Originally the pilot episode of Lost was supposed to end, or I guess 3/4 of the way through it, Jack would die. Jack was supposed to be in the plane dying or what have you, and Kate was supposed to take over as kind of the leader, the de facto leader of the entire show. And what happened was when they were doing, I guess, early screeners for the producers or whatnot, they liked Matthew Fox too much to kill him off, and they decided to go ahead and keep him on the show. So that's kind of, it's similar to Jesse Pinkman. Pinkman on Breaking Bad was supposed to die off in the first or second episode.
I was actually going to bring that up because you mentioned that.
But anywho, the idea was just that they were kind of, it's a show, apropos, another German word. They were kind of lost as they were creating and writing things. That's fine sometimes, but it does tend to be a more seamless, well structured production when you have a beginning, a middle, and an end in mind. A lot of my writing, I think I told you before, Nate, a while back, I do a lot of reverse engineering with my writing. I think of the ending first a lot of times, and then work my way back from there as far as how would I get to that point. Like, for example, with Slade and Ash, I knew exactly how I wanted that book to end years before I got to it, and then I kind of made sure I got to that point. So it made it easier for me. I did the same thing with Ipswich. That's a long series, but I did the same thing with that. It just makes things a lot clearer in my mind.